Thank you for coming to my presentation on the identification, social and emotional development, and underachievement of gifted students. So what is giftedness? As you can see, there are a lot of technical definitions for giftedness, but it can be simply defined as having an ability that is significantly above the norm for one's age. When people typically think about giftedness, they usually relate it to the child's performance in the classroom. But the truth is, these gifts can manifest in many different ways. Art, music, leadership, mathematics, and science are just a few of the different areas that these children have developed a gift for. However, as I said before, these are only technical terms, and in my opinion, they don't exactly capture the entirety and the complexity of giftedness. I personally didn't really understand what it meant to be gifted until my professor, Dr. Szymanski, shared this metaphor with my class. One of the best analogies that I have heard describing the social and emotional life of a gifted person is comparing it to a can of paint. It is not that the gifted child has more. He has a gallon, she has a quart, everyone else has a pint. It's qualitatively different. He has a brilliant magenta where others have a basic pink. She has a cerulean blue where everyone else just has navy. It is a level of intensity that makes the highs much higher and the lows much lower. So as you can see, the technical terms don't account for one of the biggest components of giftedness, the social and emotional development. If someone were to look only at the technical terms of giftedness, they might think these gifted children have it all. I mean, who wouldn't like to be known for having a special gift or talent? The reality is, a lot of these gifted children go unidentified, particularly in the educational system. At such a young age, gifted children often have a hard time identifying and understanding their own gifts. And when their parents, teachers, and peers leave their gifts unidentified, it can be very harmful to the child's social and emotional development. Research has shown that gifted students often feel isolated by their peers and misjudged by their authority. As a result, gifted children often begin to question their own worth, as well as the worth of others who seem less gifted or less creative. Furthermore, gifted students are often understimulated by regular classroom activities and are often misjudged by their teachers for bad behavior, when in reality they're just trying to cope with their boredom. As the parents and teachers of gifted and creative children, you play the most important role in identifying the child's characteristics of giftedness. So what are the characteristics of giftedness? Most look to the educational sector to identify giftedness, as gifted students often show higher levels of academic performance than the typical student. While academic achievement and IQ can be good indicators of giftedness, they are not the only indicators of giftedness. Instead, educators and parents should also evaluate the social, emotional, and psychological characteristics of giftedness that these individuals will frequently manifest. Gifted children perceive the world much more abstractly and are able to make more sophisticated conclusions than other children their age. This means that gifted children not only think differently, they feel differently too. Psychologist Dr. Dabrowski states that the gifted child's feelings will commonly manifest into what he calls intensities. He further identified 5 different types of the ways that these intensities will manifest: psychomotor, sensual, intellectual, imaginational, and emotional. In this light, intensities can be a positive force for gifted children. Unfortunately, this is not always the case, as many children's gifts and intensities go unidentified. When this happens, teachers and parents fail to recognize that these children have different needs than the average child, and in this case, intensities are a negative force for gifted children. Research indicates that gifted individuals have unique stresses that are associated with their intensities and often go overlooked by their authority. Heightened psychological intensity, perfectionism, high expectations from others, and the effects of stereotyping that comes with being labeled as gifted are all unique stressors to gifted students. Furthermore, poverty, inadequate educational placement, peer pressure, and family dynamics are all additional stresses that can lead to underachievement and emotional difficulty later in the gifted child's life. Underachievement in gifted individuals occurs when there is a clear discrepancy between the individual's ability and their achievement. Researchers point out that while characteristics of underachievers vary by the individual, underachievers will often demonstrate low self-efficacy, poor self-concept, and low self-confidence. So, one can see how important it is to identify characteristics of giftedness early on so measures can be taken to reduce the probability of underachievement and support appropriate social and emotional growth. Research also shows that special subgroups within the gifted population, such as gifted females, gifted minorities, and socioeconomically disadvantaged gifted children, all show higher rates of underachievement later in life. Sadly, underachievement for many of these groups occurs from inadequate identification measures or societal pressures that hinder their gifted development. Research has also shown that many underachievers who seem unmotivated may actually be struggling with attention deficit disorders or other learning disabilities that go unidentified due to having the label of being gifted. Many people think that giftedness and behavioral, social, or learning issues cannot go hand in hand. But the fact is, high ability students can have all of these, and when it's not addressed, it can significantly impact the probability of underachievement later in their life. Research further emphasizes the impact of parenting on their gifted child's achievement or underachievement. They found that gifted children from homes where the parents had inconsistent parenting techniques, were restrictive and punishment-oriented, and did not encourage self-motivation or autonomy had higher levels of underachievement. Interestingly, researchers found that 66% of underachieving students reported that peer influence was the strongest factor impeding their achievement. Research went on to show that when gifted students are surrounded with friends who care about learning, they demonstrate much higher educational outcomes than those with less educationally interested friends. Now that you understand how important your role is as an educator or parent, it is important to utilize strategies that ensure proper development of the child's gifts. My 10-year-old cousin, Leanna, is in a gifted and talented program at her school, and she agreed to share some of her experiences and as well as give some advice. In response to my first question, Leanna said, "Gifted and creative means that you can learn and use more skills quicker. It also means that you can create more connections between a variety of things. Lastly, I believe that every gifted child tries their hardest on each task." In response to my second question, Leanna said, "My favorite part of the Gifted and Creative program is the challenges that it brings compared to my other classes. I like how the program is not just centered around one subject, so I can make connections between the different subjects. It's helpful that the program clearly shows you how you can use the skills from this class in real life. I also really like talking with the other gifted students and seeing how they take on these challenges." Leanna's advice for someone who is struggling with their gifts is that they don't hold back on using them and they try hard in each of their obstacles in their way to success. As I previously mentioned, parents and educators play a huge role in promoting social and emotional development in gifted children. While this may seem like a huge undertaking, there are several measures that educators can take. First, research shows that gifted students often report they think their non-gifted friends don't understand their social and emotional concerns as much as their gifted friends do. So, using a gifted group discussion makes them more likely to express their concerns, doubts, frustrations, and feelings. This method also welcomes an entire range of gifted students from differing cultural, socioeconomic, and social backgrounds. Second, the use of film or literature therapy with young gifted students can also be a useful classroom tool for addressing the student's social and emotional development. Specifically, this activity can help identify similarities between themselves and the story's characters, empathize with what the characters are feeling, and reflect on identification with the characters or their situations. Lastly, teachers can also prevent underachievement in the classroom by promoting self-efficacy. Studies indicate that students who have been successful in the past are more likely to believe that they will be successful in the future. Thus, teachers are encouraged to help young children recognize their successes and offer rewards for completion of certain projects in order to increase self-efficacy. After many studies of the effect of family dynamics on giftedness, psychologists have identified several ways parents should approach their child's gifts. First, while many parents think it is their role to ensure that their gifted children are perfectly well-rounded, the pressure that comes with that concept can actually be very harmful to the children. In many cases, parents will often encourage, prod, and even force students to spend less time learning or creating something they're passionate about so they can excel in an area that the parents want them to. Instead, psychologists recommend that parents encourage and nurture their child's other interests. Summer programs for gifted and creative children are also a wonderful option to broaden your child's interests while in a safe and accepting community. I have included a link to a gifted and creative program I designed as an example of what such programs may entail. Finally, parents also hold the misconception that they understand what their gifted child experiences. As I mentioned before, research shows that gifted individuals feel and think differently than typical person. Their intensities are unlike what we ever experience, and they perceive the world much differently than you and I. Therefore, it can be extremely beneficial to both you and your child to reach out to someone who specializes in giftedness.